You're tuning into the Journey to Your Best Self podcast, where we explore the past holistic well-being, personal growth, and living a fulfilling life. Each episode, we bring you insightful conversations, practical tools, and inspiring stories to help you integrate your mind, body, and spirit on your journey to becoming your best self. Let's dive in and embark on this journey together. All right, welcome back to the Journey to Your Best Self podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian O'Neill. And as always, I'm here with my sister and co-host, clinical hypnotherapist, a certified life coach, yoga instructor, Tara O'Neill. The Journey to Your Best Self podcast is where we guide you to your path to personal transformation, fulfillment, and spiritual growth. Today, we are honored to welcome a truly inspiring guest. That's inspiring in all caps. Amy Lynn Carroll, affectionately known as Babs. Amy Lynn is a certified holistic practitioner, spiritual development coach, and life coach whose journey from the depths of a stage 4 cancer diagnosis to becoming a beacon of resilience and empowerment is nothing short of remarkable. Her transformative courses such as Opening to Your Intuitive Voice and Life Charter have helped countless individuals find their true selves and embrace the flow of life with grace and courage. We're excited to dive into her story and insights today and explore how we can all learn to live more consciously and purposefully. Amy Lynn, Babs, welcome aboard.
Hi, Brian. Hi, Tara. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. We are definitely appreciative and excited.
Absolutely. Quite an introduction and there was many things that we had left off there, and I know you are very humble, but our listeners definitely over the next hour are going to get a lot of information that hopefully will flow to them over their podcast feed and on the videos if they're watching online. And we're just really excited because one of the things that we want to do here is to give people that are listening or watching something that they can take away on their journey. And there's just so much, even in our interaction, that has been inspirational. And there's a feeling that I've already gotten just talking with you that's excellent. So we're really excited. Where to begin? Can you take us back? I am very fascinated by the spiritual name. Was there a pivotal moment where things really changed for you prior to the Babs, say, or before you started in this stage of your journey? Was it something happen where a light flickered, or was it an aha moment, or was this a gradual journey for you to get where you are today?
Well, it's a great question, Brian, and thank you. One, for letting me be here with you and to be present with you and your audience, your listeners. It is a space that I've been called to in a way that I never imagined I would prior to that spiritual name of Babs. And just a little sneak peek. What do they call it? When we reveal the ending before we tell the story, is that Babs is actually short for Badass Butterfly. And
that's amazing.
It was I actually, while I'm going to answer your question, I think I'm going to take it in a little bit of a different direction than that might be expected. Is how did I get the name Badass Butterfly? My husband and I, we've been married 17 years, and 14 years ago, we embarked on a 2-year journey into a program called Authentic Transformation. And it was a group of 12 of us with a moderator or a teacher and an instructor and his, sidekick. From all over the United States. Once a quarter, we'd get together in person for 3 days. And in our first meeting, they kind of gave me the spiritual name of Emerging Butterfly. And so butterflies have always been fascinating to me, even before they were like really kitsch in the marketplace. I just have always been fascinated by butterflies. And we were about a year into our program, and I showed up at one of our quarterly meetings with a shiner, a black eye. And I'm not always been as overt and outgoing as people that know me today might imagine or have experienced. And a couple of days prior to leaving for that trip, I had gone to the convenience station to just pick up a newspaper for my husband. And as we sat in the parking lot, or as I pulled into the parking lot, I witnessed just a heart-wrenching situation where a man was beating his wife in the front of their car. And in the back seat of that car sat a baby. And while people would stand around and were yelling, nobody was making sure that that baby was out of harm's way. And it wasn't a thought. It was simply an action. I opened the back door, I pulled that baby out, and in the midst of that, received a couple of, there was contact between this man and my face, broke my glasses, but that baby was out of harm's way. And for me, that's all that mattered. It was a step towards getting them the help that they needed. And so while there's a whole long story that goes behind that, I share that because that was one of those pivotal moments in my life where so often we think about like ego versus our ethereal experience, our divine experience. And that wasn't Amy Lynn going in to take hold of that baby and remove it from harm's way. That was emerging butterfly. That came from a place beyond this physical, practical human experience. And so it's that space of allowing ourselves to open to something that's greater than ourselves, even so much so as to put ourselves in harm's way in order to protect another. And so as I showed up that weekend for that quarterly meeting, and was sharing the experience, because of course there was many questions as to why Amy Lynn Carroll shows up with a shiner. Somebody, in the group just simply said, that butterfly ain't emerging anymore. That's a badass butterfly. And so from there on forward, it's, for me, I've really embraced it because what we call ourselves, how we see ourselves, is instrumental, not only in how we see others, but how we engage in the world around us. And so at first, it was a story that I'm not sure I would have told widely. And yet in recognizing that, again, that impetus, the impulse to care for another, even while putting myself in harm's way, came from a place far beyond culture and society norms, expectations, traditions, even. And so that is how Amy Lynn Carroll became Babs and began to really live into this fuller life experience from a metaphysical, from a practical, and from a very authentic and real space.
Wow. Yeah, tremendous
That's
story.
beautiful. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I mean, it's fitting in many ways, the representation of the butterfly because of the metamorphosis it makes in its life, right? It's that's quite a transformation if you look at, the natural world. So
Yeah,
that was an amazing moment. It sounds like.
I love that it could be a metaphor. It sounds like for many other things in your life. It's almost like once you go after something, not in a ego way with wanting a return at the end, cause of effect per se, but you see the right thing to do, not in a good or bad way. And what I'm kind of going to get to is a little bit more of a challenging question in terms of defining the ego and the spiritual self, and how to integrate that, right? Because we're still the ego, we're still the Amy Lynn, but now there's this whole other part of us that has emerged that we can't quite quantify or identify in a traditional way. So was there also a sense of maybe even grieving part of yourself, grieving part of the ego loss, or I know there's a lot of different ways to call it, maybe a little bit of an ego death. Can you speak to what that meant in that transformation? Was there a sense of a loss either with that specific moment or in other moments?
Sure. And I think it's a great question. And from my experience, I'm going to answer a little differently
Yeah.
because for me, I believe in building bridges. I think so often from this material space, this very practical space, the human experience is extremely important in bringing forth the lessons that we get to experience that is the journey back to our best self. And so for me, it wasn't about a killing off or a dying off of the ego. Rather, it was really a clearer understanding of the ego's purpose and role in my experience. And that it's not about negating, it's not about eliminating or toxifying. It was really a moment as there was a warming up to this space of being Babs and really owning that. What I found was that just this immense gratitude to that ego part of me that had carried me to that point through just what some would call unconscionable life experiences. And it was important that that ego be there because I didn't have the spiritual, metaphysical wherewithal to do the work at that time when I faced those other challenges. And so instead of that idea of a dying off or a grieving, there was really this celebration, because the celebration was an honoring of the fact that that ego had been present for me in so many situations and had protected and carried me and gave me the strength and courage to transcend and move beyond that to a point where that true essence, who I had always been but had forgotten along the way, could shine through. And so building that bridge of celebrating and honoring that path of the ego, and then moving forward beyond that, once that recognition and that clarity comes into place, I recognize the importance again of building that bridge. You know, the ego is so important in this human experience because it does things like create fight or flight in a moment where we need to be, spot on, as opposed to in some sense of quiet meditation. Is that ego it's an amazing protector. It's an amazing encourager. Our imagination is rooted in the ego. So the idea of creativity, and I think of beautiful ballrooms or we've been to museums and we've seen art. Each of us in our own way have seen that kind of creativity, and without the presence of ego, it's very likely that we wouldn't have that to experience, because the person that was expressing it might not have shared it with us.
Yeah.
And so it's the honoring of ego, but also honoring that recognition of our authentic, ethereal, divine self that's been there and been present all along, but we'd simply forgotten along the way.
Yeah, that's so beautiful and so eloquently put in what we are trying to do here in at your one self, is that we don't want to demonize or exclude any part of ourselves because it was probably a protective mechanism, right? I think that the mind, the body, and the spirit are so infinitely intelligent that everything, is for our support and for our evolution. And so maybe some traditions will oversimplify, oh, the ego is bad and the higher self is good. I think we're at a time in our growth or expansion of consciousness that it's like, well, wait, this is actually a new phase that we're integrating and having this experience and doing this dance along. So thank you for being able to put that into words. Can you tell us what it was like following your TED Talk? What inspired you to do that? And was that another layer that you had to break through, a barrier, that level of vulnerability and sharing? And what led up to that?
You said the V word, vulnerability. And in so many instances, yes, absolutely. We think that it requires a breakthrough in order for us to transcend or move beyond or even move through a challenge. And the impetus to that TED Talk, I had actually thought about doing a TED Talk for many years. And in October of 2022, I had a stroke. Now, prior to that stroke, cancer had a field day within my body, and so my mobility was limited. I still had use of my left arm and hand, so much so that I had taught myself to write with my left hand because I was right-handed prior to some tremors and losing the use. But in October of 2022, when I had that stroke, I got to make a choice. I was allowed the invitation. I was allowed to take heed of an invitation to live life a little more out loud. And the fear of doing that was gone. The fear of living out loud, the fear of being vulnerable and telling a story that other people might not understand and that I might not even be able to put into very good words was gone. It had dissipated back into its native nothingness. And so this idea of doing a TED Talk. So in October of 2022, I had this stroke, and there were many months after that where it was simply just coming back into my own, into an experience of just life and the physical strain that had impacted. It left me a quadriplegic. So as a type A personality, now relying 99.9% of the day on those around me, that idea of vulnerability. I didn't have autonomy over my own existence and my own presence, just my own body or my own desires. So I was afforded the opportunity to really question and think about what was important. And I knew that I had been blessed along many years of experience. And so the idea of doing this TED Talk, it just felt natural. And so these stumbling blocks that I had had prior to the stroke had all removed themselves. I did it a year after my stroke. My TED Talk went live. 18 months after my stroke, I published my first book. And what I recognized through that process is that fear, which we're all familiar with, fear is imagination misunderstood. And so it gave me this opportunity to engage in something that, from a very practical and human perspective, is a large impact for so many of us in our lives. Fear is an important thing. Again, just like ego, we're not meant to eliminate the idea of fear from our experience, but to understand what it truly is. And so this idea of the TED Talk and the book and living life very differently allowed me the opportunity to make fear a friend. And when we make something a friend, we desire to better understand it. We want to engage in a new way. We want to hear what fear has to say. We want to see what it has to show us. And when we can go in without the expectation that fear is anything, it's like remove the definition completely and start fresh. What I realized is that fear is imagination. And as children, we're taught that imagination is amazing. That's where our creativity comes from. It's where artistry comes from. Imagination, however, if taken to an extreme, can be detrimental to our experience. Whether it's the imaginary friend that becomes the only friend we have, and so therefore it stunts our social growth, or whether it is a fear of heights or engaging with people, or a fear of failure, or a fear of not being a good wife or a good daughter, or whatever the fear is that idea of imagination taken to extreme. And so we don't eliminate the fear. We become partners with it, and we build a bridge from the lessons that it has to show us. Fear, someone said a couple of weeks ago to me, well, fear is what keeps us safe. And just in that moment, what I recognized is that the belief, the borrowed belief that we need to be protected, allows us to take something that's very valuable to our experience and put the responsibility on fear, on our imagination, that we would be safe. And so just letting go of this idea of borrowed beliefs. And a borrowed belief is something that we gain from those around us. Maybe tradition, maybe cultural, maybe just instruction from parents or professors or coworkers or friends. And they're never, it's not about someone imposing thought on us, because that's very different than brainwashing. But borrowed belief is this space where our parents bring us up in one religion or another. They bring us up in one culture or another. And they are doing the best they can. It comes from a place of love, a place of wanting to guide and share. But if I don't engage with those beliefs to a place of experience, then in a moment of crisis, guess what? We're not having a crisis of faith. We're having a crisis of belief, because our foundation is built on borrowed beliefs. Because experience is faith. Experience lets us trust. Experience lets us know, even without being able to explain, lets us know of our safety, of the right step that is next. But if we're looking in this place of borrowed belief, which is what fear is, with fear, we're borrowing a belief of the imagination that we've created in our own minds. And it stops us from having a fuller life experience.
That's
and so I
beautiful.
did a TED Talk.
Yeah. I mean, that was the mini TED Talk right there. So thank you for that wisdom. I'm processing the one thing I'm curious is the borrowed belief is, I'm a big alliteration person, so that's going to be sticking with me forever. My first question was, I bet she works with clients asking them, is that a borrowed belief? Or have you ever thought about which beliefs are borrowed? And two, I love your take on it, because it's not that our parents, and for the most part, our caregivers are doing the best they can and instilling these beliefs. But at what point do we question them and say, well, maybe that one's not serving me anymore? Is there time in someone's life? And also, how do you broach that topic with your clients or in your programs?
Well, for me, it's all about learning to question and understanding where the question comes from. I grew up in a household where you do what you do because you're told to do it, and the consequences of not doing it were dire. And so I didn't learn the critical thinking skills. I didn't understand the relationship with the idea of questioning. And as we grow older, so many of us that may have been raised in a similar situation, maybe not to that extreme, but there's still this place of, we don't question authority. We don't question our leaders. We don't question our parents, because it's seen as being disrespectful. And at an extreme, it can be disrespectful depending upon how we engage with this idea of questioning. And so for me, it's this idea of not questioning for the sake of being a rebel or proving something right or wrong, but questioning from a place of a genuine curiosity, a genuine desire to know what is true for me. Because there's a difference between what's true for me and what's true for you. And different doesn't make it wrong. It just simply makes it different. But if I don't know what I believe, if I don't know what is true for me, then how can I have a connected dialogue or a sense of resonance with anyone around me? So when we talk about the idea of borrowed belief, I don't introduce the idea of borrowed belief until we've talked about what beliefs are. Because it's so important to understand, one, not to eliminate a belief just because it no longer serves us. But in that space of, if we don't know what we believe, and so many people don't, because we don't stop and think about, For example, within one of the programs that I offer, there are 4 steps to the process of really calling into being the experience that you're called to. And the first step is the premise. And the premise is, what is the belief? What do I believe? And do I actually believe that? Or is that a belief that has been shared with me that I then took on and it's carried me to here, but is it still serving me? And if not, what belief do I want to explore that would better serve me at this place in my life? And so this idea of belief it's not about making beliefs good or bad. It's about recognizing where a belief serves my experience in this moment, or may have served my experience leading up to this moment. And then taking that belief and making it experience.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much
that
for
preemptively answered a follow-up that I had in a way, or at least you started to. You have, I could understand how a borrowed belief could be preventing someone from headed um, down a path to on their journey, right, to some form of self transformation, self actualization. But isn't there a concern when you have that void now, right? If someone wants to totally break away from maybe past beliefs and they remove them or disassociate themselves from them or turn away from them, that there's nothing there now filling those gaps. And how do people, is that a concern that you have? How do you begin to fill them, and how do you guide people into finding replacement beliefs?
Sure. Well, I love the idea of the gap, because to me, the gap is a place of healing. There's no expectation, there's no judgment, there's no responsibility in the gap, because there's nothing to gauge it against. And so that place of healing, that place of resonance, that place of invitation, when we recognize that a belief is no longer serving us, I actually encourage people to sit in that gap for a little bit. The unknown. We are taught, especially in this Western society, that if we don't know, we better figure it out. And we better do it quickly, because the not knowing could be the end of us. And I truly believe that the not knowing is actually the beginning of us, because the not knowing gives us a place of frontiers. Knowing something or believing something or thinking we believe something often creates a boundary that prevents us from moving forward or moving sideways or even moving backwards and revisiting ideas. There's a boundary in our thought, whereas the unknown is a frontier. It's an invitation. And that frontier, that invitation, is what the divine mind is actually calling us to. No matter what scriptural or spiritual text we read, and I've read, let me preface what I'm about to say by saying, I have read the Christian Bible, I've read the Jewish Bible, I've read the Quran, I've read the Bhagavad Gita, I've read the Vedas. I've studied deeply to be able to speak from a place of experience and not knowledge. And so if we look at what each of those guiding texts would offer, they tell us that God, universe, source is unknowable. And yet we set out on this journey in our human experience to know God, to know the universe. And when we don't, we think there's something wrong with us. And the reality of it is that the not knowing is actually more in tune with our true essence, who we are, why we're here, and what we're doing, than the seeker constantly looking for that answer. And so as we bridge that gap from the unknown and learning to be comfortable in the unknown, we want to bridge that gap between the ego, between the practical human experience, and that ethereal true essence of who we are. And for me, that first step is premise, it's belief. examining what those beliefs are, for no other reason to do a brain dump so that you can then begin to go back and engage with those. You've got that gap. The second step is, what's the vision? Okay, I know what the belief is, and I may or may not connect with that belief, but what would the vision be for me if that belief were non-existent? So we've got the belief, we've got the vision, and hey, our creative mind, our imagination that we talked about earlier, that's what helps us create. It's in some circles they call, what's the ideal life or the ideal day or the ideal situation. And so we can create that vision of what we would like to have the experience in our life feel like, look like, transform us to. So we've got premise, which is belief. We've got vision. The third step in the process is, what's the purpose of all of this? Simon Sinek says it best. What's your why? And what's your why as it relates to that specific belief and that specific vision? For you, not for everyone else, but for you, for me. Why do I want to do this? And what vision do I have for this aspect of my life? And then, of course, the fourth step is, what's my strategy in getting there? What's the legwork? What's the heart work? What's the soul work that I'm going to do in this aspect of my life? Because I've recognized that this belief that may have carried me to where I am today no longer serves me. So in place of that, what are those next steps? And I get to be in command of that space, not control, but command of that space, where I'm inviting in the knowledge and experience of others. I'm inviting in the exploration and the discovery, the experimentation, to determine for me what is true, what is right, what is honest for me.
Thank you so much. There's so many things that I got excited and really felt experience. You're a beautiful speaker, and I love how you did the command and control. I encourage listeners to go watch the TED Talk so that we to hear more about the control and command. Beautiful. So, are you familiar with Byron Katie's work?
Is it true?
Is it true? So that's what I was thinking of. And so similarly, where you could do that work at home, you could start at home, or people can go to your website and get this information. And it's very similar in the, who would you be without the thought is one of Byron Katie. And she does a worksheet, Judge Your Neighbor, if that she offers for free on her website. So the first question, is it true? And then one of the questions is, who would you be without that thought? And similarly, would you liken that to the ideal life, or the it's almost like the imagination or creativity like has space now, right, where it didn't before. And this is just a question, and it is so open, it's so expansive, and that's what I got from you when you were expressing that. It's this expansiveness, it's this empowerment, and so it's so accessible, right? So our thinking mind is like, well, that's going to be a lot of work, right? And so can people can they start right now?
In my opinion and my experience, absolutely. And you get to, like, this conversation, any conversation that you hear that sparks a sense of resonance in your heart, in your soul. And we all know the difference between when our intellectual mind gets excited about learning a new fact versus when our soul is like, ooh, I could sip that cup. And so it's that space of, what I do encourage people to do without exception is that, because, especially if this is a new place of exploration and discovery, find a travel partner. So often, just in general terms, we think about any journey that we've gone on. Most journeys are easier. They're more enjoyable with a travel partner, whether it's going to the gym at 6 o'clock every morning or whether it's going for a walk on the beach. The idea of traveling life with a travel partner is really what we're called to in our truest essence anyhow. And the importance of that travel partner is not someone who's there to fix us. We're not broken. It's not even someone there to guide us. Because if we're really doing this soul searching work, our soul will guide us. There's a book, Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Well, I believe that when we came to being in this human experience, we had already been imparted all of the wisdom in ages that we can't even comprehend in this moment, let alone imagine. So that travel partner is really just someone there to hold our hand, to pull up beside us and remind us that while the work may be hard and uncomfortable, we're not doing it alone. But the importance of the work and doing those questions and sitting in it, whether it's Byron Katie or whether it's some other thought leader that you resonate with, showing up for yourself is the first step. And sometimes it's easier to show up for ourselves when we know we can do that with the support of a friend or I refer to them as travel partners at each step along the way. But yes, it's absolutely, you don't have to have a coach. You don't have to go to a Byron Katie, seminar, which I highly recommend if you are interested in her work that you go and you do that and partake in those. But we can start those steps, each of us individually. We already have within us what we need to be able to do that.
Yeah, I love that so much, in that I think sometimes that people are like, well, I feel alone, and that they have to do this on their own. Maybe not so much anymore, but 7-8 years ago, I felt that there wasn't a whole lot of people that understood my curiosity. And maybe it was my own fear, and maybe I did have to go partially alone on it. But I want people to know that the support is absolutely fabulous on this journey. And also, you'd be surprised when you reach out to people how open they are also of this, in supporting you. I mean, I'm so blessed to have so many people in my life that are supportive. And so that was a story in my mind too, that,
Right.
oh, well, they might think this is weird or a little unprecedented, but it's funny, once, I spoke my truth, there was no backlash, so to speak. Thank you so much for the wisdom and the encouragement.
Well, and I think too, in that space, it's really important for listeners, if for each of us, we are all on our own journey. And if we're looking for that travel partner, I think it's imperative that we be really clear in what we're looking for in that travel partner, and that we voice those expectations to that individual. I've had times in my life where I reached out to someone and what I needed from them was very different than what they delivered. But I didn't express that. Look, I'm not asking you to fix me. I'm not even asking you to commiserate with me. I don't want a dialogue here about the issue. I want someone to sit with me and hold space with me and pull up alongside and just help me not be alone in these thoughts. And because so often when people reach out, if you're not aware of what their need is, we may be hesitant to reach back because we think the expectation of what they're looking for from us may be different than what we can provide. And each of us can sit quietly with a friend. Each of us can say from a deep and honest place, I'm so sorry that you're struggling with this. How can I listen and be helpful? But if we don't express that, we may actually limit those friends and those support partners because they think the expectation is different. Those people are available in our circles. They are ready, willing, and able. Our clear expectation that there are no expectations is actually the invitation that so many people that could support us need to hear, that gives them the courage to pull up alongside you as you're working through a struggle or a question or a challenge.
Yeah. And I will sometimes preface with, I don't want any advice. I don't want any feedback. I would just like to listen. And I feel really good about that and it's also great because then I know that it's me. I'm not necessarily influenced when I'm in a inquisitive state. That being said, are there any other questions that they could ask their potential travel partner if they feel that's so confrontational?
Well, I think part of it is it's learning to speak your need.
Okay.
And so as far as asking, I think that all you can do is say, here's what my expectations are. But I think the best way that we can actually find those right travel partners is to be a good travel partner. When a friend reaches out to us, like how often do we have, somebody go, hey, do you have 10 minutes? Oh, yeah, sure. What do you need from me? Do you need me to listen? Do you need me to provide feedback? So it's learning not just how to ask for help, but also learning and then demonstrating for those around us how to be of help. And it also opens up that door for that person to be a good travel partner for you because you're actually demonstrating what that's like. So often, a friend will call and they'll want support or they'll need this, that, or the other. And what I have learned through that process is that when I ask that question, there's a gap
Mhm.
because the person reaching out doesn't exactly know what it is they're looking for. We get in the habit of rehearsing
Mhm.
our challenge, rehearsing our anger, rehearsing our feelings and emotions, telling the story again and again and again. And yet, if we show up as a committed friend and we're asking, I could not be happier than to be here for you. What do you need from me today? How can I best support you in this conversation? And it gives them the opportunity to take a deep breath and say, I just need to vent for 10 minutes. Great. I'm
Yeah.
all ears. Or,
Yeah.
you know what? I'm stuck and I need help. I need advice. Great. I'll do what I can. And what I can't, we'll figure out together. But it allows us also to not take on the challenges of our loved ones, our friends, our coworkers. When they're reaching out to us, how often at the end of the day or the end of a conversation are we just exhausted? And it's we all know someone that says, oh, they just suck the lifeblood out of me.
Yeah.
Well, that's not something that's being done to us. That's something that we're allowing.
Sure.
So if we can learn to preface a conversation, preface a support system by saying, how can I be of help to you today? How can I be of support to you today? What are you looking for? What do you need? Not only does it help that person grow, but it helps me remember I'm not taking on what they're about to unload. They're not
Yeah.
unloading on me. And it's not my burden to pick up and carry because we've set expectations clearly in the upfront. And then when I call them, it's so fun. The first time they're like, well, Babs, what do you need? And you're like,
Yeah.
yes, they've got it.
Yeah.
We're not only growing and learning ourselves, but we're blessing those around us by giving them the words, giving them the experience and the practice of showing up honestly and authentically. Because there are times when I have said, thank you for sharing what you need. I can't be that person right now. And maybe I'll help them find another who can be. And that is authenticity. And it helps me take care of me. And it also gives them permission if I reach out and they just can't take anything else into their sphere of life in that moment to say, I'm really sorry, Amy Lynn, but in this moment, I can't be that for you. Great. I'll go find another.
Yeah. That's
Yeah, and
beautiful.
ultimately, it is the individual, no matter the support system or the partner, it is the person that bears most of the burden on this journey. So no matter how empathetic or compassionate someone is, the chances of you having someone who survived cancer and had a stroke and all these different things, no one's going to be able to truly have that experience. So when they're by them, and they might not have the support system or someone else to help them along the way. What do you say? One of the cores, the themes is going that you have and you've talked about in the past is surrendering to the flow of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that so there's a lot of big topics here where we're talking about changing different beliefs and searching for the meaning and these different values and different experiences and total changes and transformations that can be overwhelming and daunting and almost too much for some people, if especially if they're used to control, right? When all these things are coming at them. So can you talk a little bit about how people can become more comfortable surrendering to the flow of life and relinquishing that control that they may be so used to having?
Sure. Well, my experience has told me that the belief of control is a misunderstanding of experience. We don't have control. And so, why it becomes such a component and an element in our life is because society would tell us that we have to be in control of things and that being in control of things is something to be championed and heralded. When the reality of our life experience is that we are in control of very little. But what we really get to do is we get to decide how we're going to show up. And in that decision of how we're going to show up, it means how are we talking to ourselves? So, for example, I used to believe that I lived on the roller coaster of life. And what I would say is right now, the listeners, I mean, have you ever had that feeling, put your hand in the air if you've ever had that feeling that the ups and down of life is a roller coaster. And for someone who is not a fan of roller coasters, that is just mind numbing and paralyzing, even to some degree. And I love the beach. While I live in Denver, so I don't get to it very often, the metaphor of the beach is actually what taught me that the way I speak to myself matters, because the ebb and flow of the ocean is what gives us the beauty, the pristine beaches. It's the ebb and flow of the water that feed the marine life. That cleans the beach and takes the toxic, chemicals and whatnot. And actually, it's the movement. And while sometimes that movement is strong and powerful in the midst of a cyclone or a hurricane, it's also matched with the peace of the flow. And so it's the power, it's the finding the balance and recognizing that in every challenging situation, it's what's the phrase? The presence of darkness does not indicate the absence of light. So it's looking for the light in the midst of darkness. And I'll give a very practical example of this. I think so many of us, and probably your listeners too, we've all heard about, gratitude journals and finding gratitude. If you're struggling in something, just go to gratitude. And it's an amazing tool. But there comes a time when it no longer meets the need, because it's almost, there's a component of it if we're doing what I call spiritual bypass. So what I had to do for me in that finding gratitude was, look, I'm struggling in this part of my life, but I have an amazing husband. So I can be very grateful for that. And that was wonderful. And it met a need for a while. But there came a moment when I was struggling in this darkness, I had to learn to look for the good in the darkness. because it didn't matter that I had an amazing husband and he loved me dearly and I consider him my best friend. That was not enough in my soul to move through the challenge. It afforded me the opportunity to go under it, around it, to stop, do a detour. But what I learned was that I wasn't moving through challenges. And so they kept showing up because the gratitude that I would latch on to was the easy stuff. So many of us are familiar with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And if you're not, it's a children's program that was on for many years in the 70s and 80s. And Mr. Rogers had a saying, and he said that it came from his mother, that when things were bad, when you were afraid, look for the helper. And that seems so logical. If you're afraid, look for the helper. If things are challenging, look for the helper. And for me, what I did was I kind of took that idea, and it's like, when things are bad, look for the good. Because the good is always present. Life is good. Keeping in mind that good and bad are just definitions of what we consider good and bad. But if we're looking for good in the midst of the challenge, what we learn is that our definitions begin to change. And that lesson, that challenge becomes a lesson, and the lesson brings blessings. But if we're going around it, or we're going under it, or we stop and decide we're not going to go through it, then we'd never realize the presence of the lesson or the blessing that is present in every challenge that we face.
Now, does that meeting the challenge head on and not using the spiritual bypass, as you put it, is that similar, or does that connect to the growth from control to command that you
Oh,
often talk about?
absolutely. It
And for
also,
those uninitiated, can you explain how just because you give up control doesn't mean, you close your eyes and then someone else is making all the decisions for you, or you're just wayward, or you're just at a stasis. You're turning that control into command and you're moving forward. Can you explain that a bit?
absolutely. Let's go back to the analogy of the ebb and flow of the ocean, because we can all relate to that versus the roller coaster. Is that with the movement of the water, the appropriate things are being brought in and deposited, or picked up and carried out. And so the idea of surrendering, so often, especially in our Western world, we think of surrendering as the white flag, and we're giving up, and we're giving over oftentimes to the enemy. Because we think of surrender in the form of war. We think of that white flag, that we're waging war and we're giving up. And the true idea of surrender is not giving up. It's not even giving in. What it is simply saying is it's acknowledging our current station in life, and acknowledging that there are those around us that could come in and be of support. Maybe they have experience that they could lend, that we could borrow until we have our own. Maybe they have a technique, or they have a space. They have the experience of being able to hold that space while I travel through the darkness. And because I don't have to do it alone, and it's the control. If we look at that ebb and flow, and the control versus command, is the control says, if it's going to be, it's up to me. And command says, well, each of us comes to this experience with amazing gifts. Sometimes we don't even realize it until someone asks us for our love and support. We don't recognize the gift that we have to offer. And so by asking for that support, by surrendering the belief that I can somehow control something that is outside of our control, because control is a misunderstanding of experience, and making that shift into a place of command, our life becomes so much fuller and so much more rich. And what I recognize is that when I made that shift from let me rephrase that, as I make the shift from control to command, because I'm not always there, I recognize the amazing gifts that I had that I had covered up because I thought it needed this rigidness of control, needed to look, sound, feel a certain way in order for it to be right and proper. And so when we think about this idea of control versus command, a quick example I'll give is, and where the kind of little God whisper came to me of the idea of the difference between control and command is a number of years ago, the 50th anniversary of Apollo 13. They made a movie, and the audio of that movie came from actual audio recordings during the Apollo 13 astronaut mission. And so we're watching this movie, and you're in the command center at NASA, and you've got all of these computer monitors. And behind every computer monitor was a guy in a white shirt with a black skinny tie and black pants and black rimmed glasses and a cigarette, because that was the times. And what I recognized just all of a sudden was that for every monitor, there were 6 to 8 individuals who were trained in the information that was being processed and shared and calculated through that monitor. And the recognition of the redundancy that each monitor brought to the story and brought to the experience, because astronauts are not in orbit from 9 to 5. They are up there for an extended period, and the importance of having support continual, whether everything being going as planned or whether there be a moment of challenge, or as we experienced with Apollo 13, a moment of potential crises, is there had to be multiple individuals who could bring their area of expertise and experience towards the common goal, the common resolution. And so one person can't be that. But if we open up our space and we invite the experience, the expertise, the knowledge, the presence of all of these different people, then the good that could was, because one person didn't say, if it's going to be, it's up to me. And so just like the idea of bringing together this community of experts who each had their area of expertise, bringing all of that to that command center afforded an experience that brought what we call in modern world heroes to the table. And to me, the real hero idea is we can't do this alone. And when we think we can, we struggle even harder than we need to in a situation that's already challenging enough. So let down that misconception that we're in control of anything to begin with, or that asking for help is somehow a show of weakness. Allow the ebb and flow to come. Let the ocean bring in the nutrients to the sand, the waters that bring that pristine beach. Let it carry back out into the ocean, the food for the marine life. And allow each to bring to the table their area of experience, the gift that they have to bring. And what we now have is an understanding of oneness. That while we're each unique, the totality of good cannot be fully expressed without the inclusion of all.
That's so beautiful. And as we unfortunately begin to wrap up, and hopefully we'll have many more conversations in the future, I think that's a great message to send people, is that they're needed and their uniqueness is to be embraced, and it's okay to let go of the competition. It's cooperation, not competition. And if we realize we all have something to contribute, and their journey is perfect, even on the spiritual journey. You mentioned spiritual bypass. Your journey might be different than my journey, but also different points of your journey, right? So there's no one way to do it. So I always encourage people, to to look at it from a different angle and know that it's perfect in every way. So thank you so much for making me feel so included and inspired, and also for our listeners, because there are so many gems. I can't wait to go back and listen. There's so many gems within your wisdom and your experience. So we appreciate the work that you do, how you serve, your humility, and just your grace and presence is beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do like to leave a couple things we always like to touch on in each episode. I was going to ask how they would begin their transformation, but it's hard to control that flow of life and to search for it in some ways blindly, because the incident that you had at the convenience store parking lot, right? The fighting through that devastating cancer, the stroke, those were not necessarily things that you sought out. You found them. So it might be hard for you to tell people where they can begin their search, right? To come to metamorphosize and come out of their cocoon in the word, or their caterpillar stage, wherever they are in their journey. Maybe you can talk if you know, and if you do have the answer, then we'll definitely love to hear that. After that defining moment that you had, right, from Amy Lynn to Babs, is there something that you do at home or you continue to do to keep yourself higher up on that self actualization climb, maybe, or to maintain um this new person that you've become, right? Are there certain practices that you do? You mentioned the reading, you mentioned having mentors or maybe teachers. Is there the meditation practice that you always do? Are there rituals that you perform? What do you do to maintain expertise? You help so many people. How do you stay polished and so well-rounded and an inspiration to others?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is that each of us are exactly where we're supposed to be. And again, there's good even in the challenge. And so for me, I would say that one practice that I do consistently is I find space to just be present with me and to be really honest about how I'm feeling about things and for it to be okay. Look, just because we're on a spiritual path doesn't mean that we're not angry or resentful or bitter or frustrated or confused. But to allow those emotions to be expressed. It's important to express them in a safe place and in a safe way. And maybe that's journaling. Maybe you're not a journaler, but in today's day and age with technology, do voice memos. Sometimes just saying, I mean, how often when you are frustrated with something or confused by something, just saying it out loud, a stream of consciousness, turn on your voice recorder on your phone and just talk. And then when you're in a place where you're able, go back and listen. Because what we need, we already have. We think that what we're searching for is outside of us, that we need a mentor or a teacher or a guide. And all of those people are extremely important to our journeys. Absolutely. But that being said, if you're not sure who those people are in your experience, believe me, let me hold the flashlight for you until you can hold the lantern for yourself. You already have within you everything that you need on that journey back to your best self, because it's not a journey to your best self. It's a journey back to your best self. And so whether it's journaling or brain dumping or music, something that just allows you to be however you are without judgment, without condemnation, without expectation, because who you are right here, right now is exactly who you are meant to be.
Yes, absolutely. And that's such an important message, because it can seem paradoxical, but I do remember a time, and just to give an example of growth, where I would say before my head even got off the pillow, I have everything I need within me. I didn't even know what that meant in the beginning. I was like, it just seems right. And so now, as things have unfolded, it becomes more true. So thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. Oh, and we do one more question. Do you have a book, that one of your favorite books, something that inspired you? It can be fiction, nonfiction, over the years, that you'd recommend someone to read.
Ooh, that's a really hard question for me because I used to be an avid reader. And what I learned about myself in that process is that I was giving my energy away in thinking that if I read the right book, I would find the answers to the questions I was sitting in. And so while I greatly appreciate that question, what I would say is that we each have in our sphere, we each have a book, an artist, whether it be poetry or music or, art in like art form, like painting, that really speaks to us. And so I'm not going to encourage to go choose a book that I have read, but to honor yourself. And we all have that. And spend 15 minutes today or tomorrow in that space that feeds your soul. And you don't even have to know what's on the menu, but just go and be present because you deserve that. And in doing so, it actually does feed us towards whatever it is that's going to show up in minute 16 or minute 6,000.
Yes, thank you so
Excellent.
much.
On that note, I have to challenge you on this one a little bit. This is the last one for me, and I have kind of made this a semi-regular question, but you mentioned Colorado, and there is anecdotally some evidence that, I don't know if it's happenstance or where the road led you to or from, but there's definitely something about Colorado that there's an energy there that is attracting, I feel like, a lot of like-minded people and those that are on the journey in some way. And it's a generalization, but it seems from what I have seen and heard that there's something special about, this is not a Jared Polis, campaign ad or anything, right? But I'm generally curious. It's obviously beautiful country. That goes without saying. Is there something, in your experience? Do you agree? Do you disagree? It doesn't matter, where you are. I feel like there's something about it, or parts of it anyhow, that kind of can contribute to genuine feelings that people have. So can you?
Sure. Well, I do think it's important that we recognize the environment that we reside in. That being said, that we moved from California to Colorado in November of 2016. In February of 2017, my health took a turn. And so I don't get out and about much. And so I think that where we call home matters. And whether that is in a bustling city or whether that's we have a cabin up in the mountains in Colorado. I haven't been there. Matter of fact, my husband's there right now with his sons, his adult sons. And it's what matters is, where do we feel like we can be present? And where do we feel like we can be authentic in that presence? And that's going to differ for everybody because our life experience is different. And I think that there absolutely is an openness to thought, consciousness in places like Colorado, places like Sedona, Arizona. There are definitely places in this human experience that would say there's an openness, there's an acceptance. And yet, I know some really present, in touch individuals who call New York City home. So it's finding what feeds you, where you feel most honest and authentic, and going for it.
Love it. We love it. Thank you.
Excellent. Well said. That's a great way to close things out. Before we do leave, Babs, it was just tremendous, as Tara had said earlier, soaking a lot of that in.
Yeah.
Where can people find you online? Can you give a little preview of what they can expect and how you can help them when you do connect with them?
Sure. I imagine in the show notes, you're going to have the proper spelling of my actual name, Amy Lynn Carroll.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
for ease sake, everything is Amy Lynn Carroll. AmyLynnCarroll.com. Instagram is Amy Lynn Carroll. Facebook is Amy Lynn Carroll. Link, like wherever your socials are. I don't do X or Twitter or whatever it's calling itself these days. But if you're just looking to feel heard, I have a widget on my website that is a voicemail widget. Because sometimes writing is really challenging. It's like, how do you find the words? What am I going to say? She doesn't know who I am. Leave me a voicemail message. I respond to everyone, and I receive every one of those messages from a place of simply being honored that you are trusting me enough to share whatever it is that you're sharing. On my website, you'll see my book, you'll see programs, you'll see all of those things. And if it's right, we will find the right way to connect and work together. And if not, if I'm not the right person, my promise and my commitment is I will help you find your next step.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
So thank you for listening, and we're so glad that we were able to do this, Amilynne.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Journey to Your Best Self podcast. We appreciate you being part of this community. For more resources, insights, and ways to connect, head over to youroneself.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, and Overcast. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, keep aligning your mind, body, and spirit, and peace, love, and self-discovery. Thank you.